A lot of attention today in political circles on the brewing speaking rights row. The row that didn't go anywhere, just put on the back burner it seems, but now back up to the boil because of a submission made to the Business Committee of the Dáil. What people might not have noticed as well were some of the other submissions, one of which was a suggestion from Labour and the Social Democrats to reform or to scrap the Dáil prayer. A short prayer that's read out before Dáil sessions in both Irish and English by the Ceann Comhairle. Gary Gannon is a Social Democrat TD, of course, and he's with me now. Gary, what is it that you guys are looking for?
I think we're on something to be more reflective of our modern parliament. I mean, I think the idea of taking a minute to reflect, I think that's a very good thing. I'm somebody who likes to kind of take a breath before you go into something as serious as parliamentary work. But I think when it comes to the Dáil prayer in and of itself, I suppose that's not something that is reflective of all our belief systems. I fully appreciate it. I appreciate that there will be people there who will want to say a prayer to themselves. I think that's a good thing for people to have their faith, to acknowledge it before the chamber. But as a collective, maybe the Dáil prayer is actually not suited. It's not something that I can really buy into on a personal level. So maybe something that's actually just more a minute of reflection in a more kind of collective sense. And those who wish to say a prayer in their own faith, they can do so. For somebody like me who wants to do a little bit of mindfulness, I can do so. But just the idea of having a singular kind of once prayer in someone's particular kind of traditions, actually it's not reflective anymore. So actually we were asked to make submissions to how we might reform the Dáil for better. That was one of a number of proposals that we in the Social Democrats placed forward. I actually just think it's been a little bit more inclusive.
Senator Ronan Mullen with us as well. Senator, it's a pretty kind of pragmatic approach, isn't it? If you want to say a prayer to whatever God you happen to worship, fire away. If you want to do a bit of mindfulness, fire away. A moment of reflection rather than an official prayer.
Well, I was actually given a tour of Leinster House to some foreign visitors last night, and I was showing them the proclamation of the Republic, and I was drawing their attention to the idealism of the document and how at the bottom of it talks where they place the cause under the protection of the Most High God, and they pray that nobody who serves that cause would dishonour it by cowardice, inhumanity or rapine. And it struck me how often that kind of idealism of nobility of service of others is linked with that kind of eternal idea of the loving God, that we all ultimately have to answer to. And it strikes me that although not everybody is a believer and nobody has to be a believer, and certainly our laws don't necessarily reflect our Christian traditions. I'm very sorry about the fact that we no longer protect human life at all stages, for example. But there's something still deeply Christian about our country, where people who may or may not be believers associate their highest ideals with that idea of the eternal loving God, Christ's death for us. Even that's in the proclamation, the Easter sacrifice, dying so that the country might live. And it strikes me that we probably don't realise just how much we depend on our Christian tradition for a lot of what we take advantage as our modern virtues. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a functioning democracy in the Middle East, for example. We need to think about why that is. And I think the Christian tradition as it has evolved is actually associated with what we take for granted today as human rights and all the rest of it. Now, we dealt with this issue we were ahead of the Dáil on this about 12 years ago on the Seanad. And I remember at the time Ivana Bacik came forward with a similar point to Gary's and said, let's get rid of the prayer. We're not all believers here. Now I'm paraphrasing what Ivana said at the time. And I came forward with a kind of by the way, there was no support for that because people said, look, whether we believe or not, this is our tradition. We don't hollow out our best traditions. That's also paraphrasing. But I said, let's have a compromise here. Let's have 30 seconds of silence where we respect the solemnity of all people, believers or non-believers, in their solemn duties. And legislation is a solemn duty and a serious task. But I said, let's not just get rid of our best traditions either. Let's reflect on the fact that the majority of people in Ireland still claim a Christian tradition. I'd say 3 in 4 do. And that prayer to Jesus Christ, asking him to inspire our work, we're actually asking Christ to do a very beautiful thing, which is to help us serve each other.
I know, and maybe kind of somewhat surprisingly, I'm going to say, I agree with an awful lot of what you say, and I think people do underestimate the degree to which the Western world, as we would describe it now, is a direct descendant of what would have been called Christendom. But I don't know how you necessarily hollow that out by allowing people to say a Christian prayer if they want, while at the same time allowing the person beside them to do a bit of mindfulness for 30 seconds.
Well, that's what we do. We have that 30 seconds in the Seanad. You know, one of the things I didn't foresee was it's the clerk, by the way, who reads out the prayer, and unlike the Dáil, it's read out in both English and Irish. Firstly in Irish in the Seanad, and it's the clerk as opposed to the Comhairle of the Seanad who does it. What I didn't realise at the time was it used to be read, no disrespect to the then clerk, in a fairly quick way, but as a result of having the 30-second silence, it was actually quite a mindful prayer. And those who, you know, you don't have to bless yourself, you don't have to mumble the words, you know, you can be solemn in the presence of others who are believers. And I've noticed a lot of politicians over the years who would have different political perspectives of mine, but, you know, they value it. You know, it's a bit like the Angelus. You know, you don't have to be a believer to say this is something distinctively Irish.
Okay, this is a Catholic country. If Gary well, it actually says if Gannon doesn't like it, he can leave, says one listener.
That's not. I'm not saying that, Gary.
It's not going to hold your listeners,
Gary, what about, and as a compromise, keep the prayer, but, you know, add a moment of mindfulness for people?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of there to unravel from what Senator Mullen just said. But just to say, like, in terms of parliamentary democracy in its current form, Western form, a lot of it was built on the separation of church and state. Now, I accept that the Irish traditions kind of emerged very different to that, and I would have a lot of kind of questions as to how good and bad that was for us. But we won't get into that today. But I would say, what is wrong with actually just respecting the fact that actually I don't need to ask the Lord to guide my work on the day, because, you know what, it's not an authentic thing for me to say. But like, that wouldn't come as a surprise to many of my voters. But I respect the fact that other people would want that, but they can do so. Why can't we not just have a period of mindfulness, a period of reflection, that everybody can do so on their own terms? The idea of forcing a particular set of words onto a parliament, it actually is not reflective of a modern Western democracy in any real form, really. I mean, we're quite unique in Ireland in terms of holding a prayer at the start of a day. Look, again...
We're not really.
Well, just to say, again, for us, in terms of, just if I say I don't believe, that's not to say I don't respect. I respect the fact that Ronan will want to say a prayer at the start of his day, or maybe at the start of his work day in his workplace. I think that's absolutely fine. But what I also ask to respect is the fact that that's probably not best suited to all of us. So just actually reforming it doesn't take away anything that Ronan would hold dear. It doesn't take away anything that anybody else would hold dear. It actually just advances a greater principle that gives us all time to reflect in our own unique way, in our own spaces.
Would you sorry, go on.
Well, I say the truth about my life is I might quite easily forget to say the prayer, Gary. It isn't about whether you say the prayer or not.
Yourself,
yeah, exactly. But, you know, look at the British coronation, for example. You know, an awful lot of the people that didn't, but why would they ever change it? Or think of the flags in a number of different countries in Europe, countries that have radically secularised, but you still see the cross, Scandinavian. I heard somebody say, you know, they're not very fond of the Swiss, but the flag is a plus. You know, sorry, bad joke. But you know, so we have to pick up. You have to ask the question: if you go hollowing out traditions, and I don't think this is the time to go hollowing out Irish identity even more at a time when we're very uncertain about who we are and what we are.
Do you hollow out identity by having a more distinct separation between church and state? It's always been an imperfect separation in this country, even post 72 in the referendum, when we kind of got rid of the kind of special place for the Catholic Church in the Constitution. It was always an imperfect distinction.
Well, I would put this challenge to Gary and people of like mind in the light of what happened in the referendums last year. Do you want to bring forward a referendum to get rid of the reference to our divine Lord Jesus Christ who sustained our fathers through centuries of trial? Do you want to get rid of the notion...
what happened in referendums
well, exactly. Do you want to get rid of the phrase that all powers of government are derived under God from the people? Do you want to get rid of the reference that the state pledges to honour religion? You'll get your answer, I suspect, if you ask that question. So, I
do you
believe...
think we'd win that? Do you think we'd retain that?
Yeah, retain the whole lot of it, because people would recognise an attempt to remove it as a negative form of virtue signalling that has actually nothing to do with the laws that pass. You only have to look at the laws in our country.
We were a much more profoundly Catholic state in 1972 when we got rid of that in the Constitution.
But that was a direct assertion of the particular and special place of the Catholic Church, and I think the bishops at the time said they'd shed no tears if it was got rid of. But you see, the point I think we all have to remember is whether people are religious or not, they still value traditions and they still value ideals of goodness.
Respect in tradition.
Exactly. And respect for the tradition might be to say, we'll live with that prayer and we won't have such an itch about it.
Gary, should we have a referendum in tweak the preamble and get rid of the other reference as well to the Almighty God?
Look, I'm all for having that conversation. I'm all for debating Ronan on that.
You spend taxpayers' money on that, Gary. Would you really?
Let Gary.
I'm all for debating Ronan in relation to that, Ronan. I think if we can see, I think you'll respect yourself. You go to Mass on Sunday, the numbers that were previously there, if you had went 20 or 30 years ago, are not the same. If you see the number of multi-denominational schools and the desire for multi-denominational schools that are out there, there's very clearly a desire for an Ireland that is somewhat secular to what you would probably like to see.
Well, I'd say more pluralist.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah,
I'd say more pluralist. Secularism has a kind of an aggression towards religion, when I say pluralism says we should all be able to rub on together.
And exactly, Ron. So I'm glad you take the point of what I'm advancing here for this debate. Let's have a more pluralist reflection at the start of the day, where we can all respect and reflect in our own terms, rather than have one forced upon us.
We can add a prayer of your making to the one we already have.
Lots of people getting in touch. One listener says the Dáil prayer, what a load of nonsense. And somebody else, Gary, you like this. They don't think you need to leave the country, but you should resign. Gannon can resign if he doesn't like that we're a Christian country. There you go. Anyway, Gary Gannon, Social Democrat TD, Ronan Mullen, Senator. Listen, gentlemen, thank you both very much.